That's when I started saying, yes, I'm Black Irish. Thank you very much. My family came over from Morocco. But it made for a very interesting life. I learned a lot of my culture based on the music that I started playing. My background is in global music studies, so I was very fortunate to be able to study music from various cultures, but an emphasis on music from North Africa, the Middle East, and India, and the region, the entire region. And a lot of that was possible because I was born and raised in America, which is very interesting. Had I been born and raised in the Middle East, I probably would not have had access to all these styles of music. And of course, being raised in Chicago, we are the great-grandson of the music that began here in Mississippi, or the blues. And it's interesting to see how all of the world can be connected once you start looking for things. And you start to uncover what I like to call omitted histories. And so I'm going to just start with not so much talking right now, and a piece that hails from Islamic Spain. And this is what they would call a muwashshah. This is part of the classical tradition from 9th century Spain. Thank you. So, does anybody know what this instrument is? Al-oud. You know, I asked that in many crowds and nobody usually knows. This is a very interesting instrument that I came to in a backwards kind of way. I started actually playing percussion in school, and then I wanted to play guitar. I wanted to be a rock hero. And so the first song I was playing was Sweet Child of Mine by Guns N' Roses. And all of a sudden I thought, you know, many years later, I started playing music of my own heritage. My dad actually put in a cassette tape of the Egyptian crooner Abdul Halim Hafiz. Yes. And he put in a and if you don't know him, check him out, because even Jay-Z and Timbaland sampled him. He put that tape in, and I thought, oh my gosh, listen to all this guitar, listen to this stuff. This isn't ancient music, this is modern music right now. And eventually, after playing Middle Eastern music and North African music on instruments all made in Japan, I thought, you know what, it's time to pick up something from my heritage. So I ended up playing this instrument when I was about 16, al-oud, and I learned a history about this instrument from a Tunisian master percussionist teacher of mine from when I was younger. And he told me the story of a guy named Ziryab. And Ziryab lived in Iraq in about the 9th century during the Abbasid reign of Iraq. And he eventually found his way all the way to Cordoba, Spain, to Andalusia. And he took this instrument with him. And al-oud means wood in Arabic. So it's like the word wood without a W. And eventually he added another course of strings onto the instrument. And from al-oud, it eventually became what we know as the European lute. So can you say al-oud?
Al-oud.
Now say a lute.
Al-oud.
Do you hear the similarity between these two words? So the European lute comes from al-oud. And then from the lute comes the guitar. So eventually it's the great-granddaddy of the guitar. And it's pretty amazing to see how all of that transpires. For example, if you've probably ever heard this, you've probably seen or heard of a movie called Pulp Fiction. So the guy that brought that song to light, his name was Dick Dale, but his real name was Richard Mansour, and his family was from Lebanon. And he had heard his father playing that song on al-oud and darbuka, the percussion instrument that you see there. But he wanted to play it loud, fast, and hard, just like Gene Krupa played drums. He wanted to play the guitar. And so he was friends with a guy named Leo Fender, who invented the Fender amplifier and the Fender guitar, and kept giving him amplifiers that he'd crank up all the way until he blew them up. And eventually, that amplifier and those instruments gave birth all the way from a music that starts from the Islamic period, Islamic reign, a style of music in maqam, all the way to find its way to becoming an American genre of music called surf rock, which is a pretty fascinating trail. All musics are connected in that way. So Ziryab takes this instrument all the way to Cordoba, Spain, and this is during the height and the reign of Islamic rule in Spain, which is a beautiful thing because Arabic ends up being spoken there for 700 years, even up to the point where kings after the Inquisition were still using Arabic script to write. And you don't have to take my word for it because there's a beautiful exhibit inside the museum that actually highlights a lot of this too. And so eventually these styles of music became formed and came together and coalesced. So you've probably heard of a style of music called flamenco. And this many purport to be a compounded word of fallah mankub, a disgruntled peasant. And this style, they sing Yalil Ya'ain in the Arabic style, but instead of Yalil Ya'ain, they'll say Yalil 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 Even the word, though, you hear people say ole, ole. This is actually an expression that comes from Allah, Allah. When people hear a piece of poetry or a piece of music or something that moves them greatly, this is what we say. So you can listen to a lot of live Egyptian recordings and all you're going to hear is people, Allah, Allah, Allah. So inshallah by the end of this night, everybody will be saying, Allah, Allah, Allah. All right, so I'm going to show you a piece that's part of the Arabo-Andalus tradition. And this is a piece that blends Moroccan tradition along with the Spanish tradition. So you're going to hear a little bit of Arabic in it, but also a little bit of a poem by the famous author from Spain, Federico Lorca. And the poem is called La Tarara. So there was a really popular year, many of you probably know it, it's called 1492. A lot of things happened. And the chapter of Islam in Spain kind of officially came to a close with the transfer of Spain to the Catholic monarchs, Queen Isabella and Ferdinand of Aragon. And with that came the expulsion first of many Jews and eventually many Muslims as well. And ironically, they all started to congregate together in similar territories. So as soon as the Jewish expulsion happened, many of the Jews ended up going to North Africa, many of the Muslim-controlled territories, and a lot of them even ended up in Turkey, especially in the south of Turkey, which is a pretty fascinating thing that, thinking back in history, how those who were oppressed ended up seeking refuge in Muslim-controlled territories. I'll just let that out there and let you think about that for a little bit. And but what's fascinating about this is after that they also brought a lot of the culture that was cultivated for over 700 years in Andalusia, which is beautiful because it actually gave us a lot of the poetry that was built there, that was created and written there. And this style of poetry, similar to the first song I sang, was called Muwashahat. But almost no city really took on this poetry and recreated it again in about the 17th century, like Aleppo, Syria. And Syria is a very unique place in the Middle East in that one of the most longest running organic cities in the world when you go to Damascus. And it also houses, how can I say this? In Arabic we would say qalb al-shaq. It's kind of like the heart of the Middle East. And poetry, the music, it's all a standard that we look towards. So they have actually their own form of folk music as well that they call Qudud Halabiyya. Qudud Halabiyya is this folk music that's there, but it's not only influenced from that which is from Andalusia and the Middle East, but also from its predecessors before Islam even came near Syria, by the Syriani or the Syriac peasants, another Semitic language, the language that Jesus Christ actually spoke, which is a very fascinating thing to see how these cultures blended together many, many years ago. And a lot of the liturgy that you might hear in Byzantine chant still resembles also a lot of the music that we actually play in Quranic recitation, or when you hear tajweed, or even Islamic anashid. I can give you an example actually, which is a very interesting, it's very interesting because the music theory that comes from this region, we call it maqam. Maqam music theory is inherently spread through the spread of Islam, because if you've ever heard an adhan, I can tell you what maqam it's actually in. And if you go to Turkey, they actually have a specific scale or maqam for each time of the day. So the morning maqam is a maqam called sabah. So if you're waking up in the morning in Turkey, you're going to hear this maqam. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. You'd hear it something like that. Now you might be more familiar with a common one that you hear like in Saudi Arabia, which is in maqam rast. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. So when you hear this, this is music theory that you're hearing at the same time. If you've ever heard Quranic recitation, every munshid or cantor in Islam has to learn the maqamat, because these are musical theories. It's not separated from what science is either. In fact, the word music didn't even come on the scene until about the 13th century with the scholar Al-Farabi. Prior to that, anything that was creating sound, they literally called it handasat as-sawt, the engineering or the construct of sound. So music was not apart from science. Science was not apart from art or music itself. I'm basically playing for you applied physics. So I'd love the formulas after this. If anybody's a physicist, you can give me your formulas. But this maqam tradition eventually evolved in the region. And it evolved to be used not only by Muslims, but also by Jews and also Christians in their liturgy. So to this very day, if you walk into a synagogue that is of Middle Eastern origin, you'll hear maqam. If you walk into a church that's Orthodox, even Greek Orthodox, you will hear maqam. And just to give you a taste of that, here's one maqam using 3 different styles of liturgy. This is actually a piyut. It's a liturgical piece from the Hebrew Jewish tradition that comes from Iraq. That's the maqam. It's called bayati. Now here's one from the Christian tradition. لأنه الصالح لأنه إلى الأبد رحمته Hallelujah. So here's the same maqam from our tradition. Ya Imam al-Rusli So you got the idea, right? It's the same maqam, and it's repeated over and over. So it's very interesting to see how the music, something that's been contributed and spread through the spread of Islam, but adopted by other people. So if anybody ever asked you, what have Muslims contribute to the world? There's a long list, and one of them is music theory. So, just like the maqam spread, so did many songs and melodies. In fact, the next two melodies I'm going to play for you, I've heard them in Arabic, Farsi, Hebrew, in Hindi. I've heard a version of these in Hindi, Bosnian. Heck, there was a whole movie made about, in Greek as well, about one of these songs, and it's called the very cumbersome title of Whose Is This Song? And it talks about a song that in Turkey they hail to be almost like the national anthem. In Turkey they call the song Üsküdar. And if you go to Egypt, they call the song Benet Iskandariya. And if you go to other places, they have various names for this song. So I'm going to create a little medley of two melodies that you may have heard, and even if you haven't heard them, you might feel like your soul has heard them at some point. Here's one of the songs. of like a musical motif, one of those things that just keeps going around and around, and everybody says, it's my song, no, it's my song. And that's why she made this movie, and it became this big, huge political thing, saying that the Turks claim this song. What do you think in Serbia? If I see a Turk, I'm going to... And it's really said in this movie. And it's amazing to see how a song or a melody can invoke such things out of people. So, as the time goes, I'm kind of giving you a little bit of timeline here. From the 9th century, we go to the 15th century, we go to the 17th, 18th century, and eventually, during Ottoman rule, which had a large swath of the Islamic empire, shall we say, they really codified the classical repertoire of maqam. So much so that about the 19th century, there was a huge repertoire that was already notated. Now, mind you, all of these things are happening both before and after Western classical music is emerging. So when Ziryab went all the way to Spain in the 9th century, he established a conservatory of music, open to all, women and men, to learn music and the style of music that's maqam and something new as well. And what's interesting about that is you can consider that to be one of the first music conservatories in Europe. This is the 9th century. So from there, many other European conservatories also started to adopt a similar style of pedagogy, of the way to teach, and of form. And what's interesting is, especially when you get to a region like Turkey or the Ottoman region, you see these styles of music developing in tandem with each other. So much so that there were even European composers in the Ottoman courts composing with maqam style. One of them was Dimitri Cantemir. He used to be actually a Moldavian prince, was exiled and found his way all the way to the Ottoman courts composing music in maqam. So it's an amazing thing to see when you follow the trail of music and art. It's hard to deny what you can hear and what you can see with your own eyes. Like architecture, all over Spain, with Arabic writing all over it. So as this happens, we develop a form of music that we call classical music. Now when I say classical music to some of my students especially, immediately they start thinking, or it's classical, yeah. Western classical. There is Eastern classical, there's classical music. Heck, Duke Ellington even called jazz African American classical music, which it is. It really is. It's complex in its form, it's sophisticated, it maintains orchestration, it means combining many, many elements together to showcase something that has taken a long time to develop over many years. So I try to kind of create this parity, this balance, especially when I'm teaching my students in world cultures, when they come in knowing all the jazz that they think they know, or all of the classical music, and my classical music is the best. And I say, well, if you go to India, they're going to say theirs is the best. If you go to the Middle East, they're going to say theirs is the best. Everybody's is the best. So I'm going to play a little piece here, a little piece. This is part of the form. They created many forms, just like you would hear symphony, concerto, sonata. There are equivalent forms that you find in both India and Indian classical music, or the South Asia, shall I say, really, but you also find in Middle Eastern classical music. And one of these forms is called Sama'i. Sama'i comes from the root word sama, which means to hear, to listen, right? Music that you listen to for the effect that you want to gain what we would call tarab. Tarab is basically attaining ecstasy or a high, if you will, off of hearing something, like tajalli almost. If you ever heard of the Sufis use tarab to sometimes spin or sometimes to move around in order to actually get into a trance. And part of their whole intention is to channel from the divine and spread down to the world. So this is a piece that's kind of in that repertoire, and this is actually from an Ottoman composer by the name of Mas'ud Jamil, and it's called Sama'i Nahawan. So I hear that we have people from very many different corners of the globe here with us today. Is anybody from Syria by chance? From Syria, okay. We're going to honor this. I had mentioned those Qudud Halabiya before, and these have become such a strong part of all Middle Eastern countries and Arabic-speaking countries especially, that it's become everybody's folk song. I mean, these aren't just Syrian folk songs. That's just kind of the origin. So I'm going to give that along with anybody here from Iraq? Iraq? Well, we're going to give tribute to Iraq. Is anybody here from Mesopotamia? From somewhere around there? All right. Well, here's a little medley that you might hear, and this is a medley that I actually ended up orchestrating for a choir that I work with in Chicago. And it's in a predominantly African-American neighborhood of youth that are learning to speak Arabic and Mandarin at their high school, which is a fascinating thing. Chicago Public Schools now has this program. And so they were curious about what they were seeing on the news. And I thought, well, you know, I'm an ethnomusicologist, let's go the other way around. I'll go into your music class and I'll bring the culture part of it. So we discovered everything that they were seeing in the news about Syria by way of the music. And by the end of it all, they realized like, oh wait, these are real people? They're not just statistics and numbers that we see on TV? And this same class, I actually worked with them many years back after Ferguson happened, and the Black Lives Matter movement happened to coincide also with an incursion on Gaza in Palestine. And the students were asking questions about both of these things at the same time as well. And that led to a whole longer discussion about how you can find and trace back history through music. We discovered things about minstrelsy, for example, that this 90% predominantly African-American school had no idea about. And I want to give you an anecdote to the power of that too. As we discovered music and we talked about how music can be used for good, I made a mention of how music can also be used for evil. Because one of the questions the students had was, what is Jim Crow? I said, well, let's talk about minstrelsy for a moment. Let's talk about the music that you actually gained in your life and all the music that eventually came thereafter. And they realized what it was. They knew blackface was a bad thing, but they didn't really understand it until the choir director went upstairs to the library of this high school where we're learning about what's happening in Palestine, Syria, and Ferguson. And he came back down with a yearbook from 1950-something, I think. He opened up the yearbook and showed the students, a group of students, sitting there, all of them in blackface, in the very same school and the very same library that they go study in every day. I don't know if anything could have made a greater impact on these students to realize their history and how they can use something like an art or music to trace back the truth about that history. Again, uncovering omitted histories. With that said, this is actually one of the choir pieces. It's a medley, and you'll hear it in its raw form right now, that we composed when we were studying the unit on Syria.
مدرينا محتاجك يا
حالي ويا عيني بين الياسمين والريحاني حالي حالي حال بالي بالي بال 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 بيني وبينك حار العوازل حار العوازل بيني وبينك بيني وبينك حار العوازل حار العوازل بيني وبينك انت مرادي انت الحبيب فانقل ببابي حالي عجيب وحالي حالي حال بالي بالي بال حالي حالي حال بالي بالي بال حالي حالي حال بالي بالي بال حالي حالي حال بالي بالي بال حطك المياس يا عمري يا حسين المان كان يصل حطك المياس يا عمري يا حسين المان كان يصل انت واحلى الناس بين عمري كلا من سواك يا قمري حطك المياس يا عمري يا حسين المان كان يصل انت واحلى الناس بين عمري جل من سواك يا قمري. Shukran. How many people know what shukran means? We got a few hands. So shukran is how you say thank you in Arabic. And when you say shukran to say you're welcome, it's afwan. So if I say shukran, you say
Ahwan.
shukran.
Ahwan.
Tamam, mumtaz. Very good. So this next little segment I wanted to introduce kind of ties in some of the area as well. My family is from Palestine. My mother is from Jerusalem and my father is from Ramallah in the West Bank, both of these. And I'm first generation Palestinian American, and I was very fortunate to be able to learn my language up through music, through my culture. And I still find that to be my language, my culture, and religions, not religion, but religions, the Abrahamic faiths that all come from this region. The languages that share a similar bond, Aramaic, Hebrew, Arabic, being Semitic languages. So when people say, hey, that's anti-Semitic, I take offense too, because I'm a Semite as well. Many people don't realize that. Yes, I know what the real purpose and what the propaganda is, but yes, Arabs have many religions too. They can be Jewish, they can be Christian, they can be Dirzi, they can be Muslim, they can be Yazidi, they can be whatever they want to be too. So this is a little more of a secular thing, I guess you could say, that comes from our region, and I'm going to have Nedal help demonstrate some of this, but how many people here have ever heard of something called Debka? Yeah, maybe 2, 3 people here? Okay, cool. So Debka is a very unique dance, and it's a circle dance where people get together and they hold hands. But the symbolic nature of Debka is more than just that. It shows unity, shows equality, solidarity with one another, and more than anything, the actual story behind Debka is very interesting because it's directly tied to the earth, to the ground. It's a stomp dance, but people do it in a circle. It's usually a 6-step kind of a dance. But you find Debka very often in Palestine, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Jordan, and Iraq. It's kind of like Fertile Crescent area over there as well. And everybody has their own versions of it. Even one of my friends who's a scholar in Debka, funny enough, he's telling me, man, I've heard that there's stuff even in Saudi Arabia, there's even stuff like in North Africa. And I realized too that, you know what, I've been to so many Mexican weddings being in Chicago. I have a huge Mexican population. I've seen the style of it there too. People get together in a circle, hold hands, and dance around and enjoy, showing solidarity and unity with one another. You can call it a hora, you can call it a halal, you can call it a debka, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of a similar thing throughout many different cultures. And The one story that really struck me the most, though, is its connection to the earth. The way Debka even came about as being a dance, because it's traditionally played with what they call a shebeba, a flute, which is the shepherd's flute. It's a bamboo flute that you can basically get any kind of tones you want out of it. And the stomping part came because people would stomp on mud to create bricks, to create and build homes. And another really amazing theory that Nedal had mentioned to me was that as you sow your seeds, they want the harvest to come quickly. So come on, we want the harvest to come quickly. So I might even take a step and feel free if you feel so inclined to get up to do Debka. But I'm going to take a moment to let Nedal show a very simple 6 steps. So next time you find yourself at a Middle Eastern wedding that has Debka, you know exactly what to do. Got it? All right, so from these 6 steps, there are lots of methods, right? And you can create so many combinations. Sometimes it's just something as simple as a heel stomp, heel stomp, heel stomp, stomp, or heel stomp, heel. There are lots of versions, but a very simple one, if you're going around in a circle, is like a 6th step.
Right, yeah, so it's basically 6 steps. Hi, everyone.
Mr. Nedal Hamdan, by the way, on percussion.
So yeah, the walking is basically 6 steps, and it's very simple. 4 steps forward and 2 steps backwards. So basically everyone is holding hands. So we're gonna go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Right? So who'd like to join? Who'd like to try? Who'd like to
يلا نمر تعال نمر تعال come
anyone, please. Anyone. Yeah, stand. The wall. Yeah, we can. Okay, so we'll start with the left leg. The position should be pretty much like this. Stand up, stand-by position. So we start with the left one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and so on. So you want to give us some? Let me give you the. You go with the left leg. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Everybody join. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Go on. Okay. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Also 6. 1. 1. Okay. Right? 1. Yeah.
Turn around.
1. 1. Because we're gonna continue. We're gonna keep going. So it's gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is, I'm so sorry, this is kind of
More complex.
The best way to learn to do it.
okay. Let's take another one. This is kind of complicated.
Very nice. Oh, don't go anywhere yet. Now you're actually going to do it. So I'm going to actually have Nedal come back, and somebody's going to lead it right now.
This is a very small demonstration.
So if you feel so inclined to get up and do this too, please feel free to do so. This is actually a special, first of all, I want to thank the International Museum for Muslim Cultures for even having us out here. I want to thank all of you for coming out today. Yeah, give them a round of applause, please. I've met Karen and Ahmed and Nimmer and Lakshmi and Erica and everybody that's part of this museum, and I'm just continuously blown away by this. The irony of this is that I found out about this museum through the Center for Black Music Research in Chicago. And it was my friend there when I was doing research for a play that I was writing that was about the griot tradition and how the blues is not only in American music, but it's tied directly to Africa. And she said, oh, you gotta go down to Mississippi. There's this museum down there, it's the International Museum. I said, where? She said, Jackson, Mississippi. I said, where? She said, Jackson, Mississippi. I said, holy cow, I'm down there, I am down there. And maybe a few months later, my friends at IMMC, the Inner City Muslim Action Network in Chicago, gave me a call and said, hey, we're doing this thing at the International Museum of Muslim Cultures. Yeah, I know it. I haven't been there yet. He said, would you like to join us? I said, I couldn't, I was booked. And maybe just a few months later, Karen called me and says, hey, we'd love for you to come down here. And I said, okay, this is proof positive of creative visualization. You put it out into the universe and then you're meant to be someplace, right? And I'm still like buzzing over what I just saw in there, because it blends two worlds that mean so much to me, of Andalusia and especially of Africa and North Africa and Mali and Timbuktu. These are two places that house so much, from a Western lens, what we can say omitted histories. From our lens, a treasure waiting to be uncovered. And I feel like when the world realizes what lies beneath or above ground, really, all of these things, they will realize who made a substantial contribution to the world in science, in math, in music, in art, in philosophy, in religion, in everything you can think of that makes humans what they are. So, with that being said though, why don't we give you a little Debka medley taste, and this is especially for Ahmed, who is of Palestinian origin as well, and this is for everybody, not just for Palestinians. So if you would like to join us on the stage and do the dance with your new dance moves, please do so.
سلم على الحلو العزيز الغالي الغالي واسمك يا روحي واسمك يا روحي اسمك يا روحي ما يروح من بالي قيد مقيد عزبيني بين العيون العيون الغالي 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 على دلعونا على دلعونا روحوا الحبايب ما ودعونا على دلعونا وعلى دلعونا روحوا الحبايب ما ودعونا يا العزيز الغالي واسمك يا روحي ما يروح من بالي قيد عجبيني بين العيون يبا وعلى دلعونا وعلى دلعونا راحوا الحبايب ما ودعونا يبا على دلعونا وعلى دلعونا راحوا الحبايب ما ودعونا على دلعونا على دلعونا راحوا الحبايب ما ودعونا لا بدي ابكي ولا بدي بعيد بدي حبيبي اسمر اللون على هيك يبا وين عالم الله وين عالم الله وانتي مسافر وين عالم الله ما تخاف من الله ما تخاف من الله بديت قريب وما تخاف من الله وين عالم الله الله وانتي مسافر وين عالم الله ما تخاف من الله ما تخاف من الله بديت قريب وما تخاف من الله وين يا حبيبي وين يا حبيبي بالي ورايح وين يا حبيبي حظي ونصيبي حظي ونصيبي تاركني ورايح حظي ونصيبي وين عالم الله وين عالم الله وانتي مسافر وين عالم الله ما تخاف من الله وما تخاف من الله بديك قلبي وما تخاف من الله بديك قلبي وما تخاف من الله بديك قلبي وما تخاف من الله.
Beautiful. That was awesome. So, forgive me for the informal nature of everything that we're presenting here, but you seem like a pretty casual crowd, very warm, welcome, getting up and dancing, laughing, talking. It's a wonderful thing. Cheers to you. So, I was gonna bring it back to another portion of the segment here. You notice there's a bit of a timeline, a thread. Music is something that I like to consider and I call a cumulative affair, a cumulative process. What that means is every style of music that's out there is built upon other styles of music that come before it and before it. Kind of like the blues, right? So if you go to Africa right now, North Africa, there's a spiritual style of music that you find in Morocco, and it's called Ginawa. Ginawa music. Ginawa music is the spiritual music that eventually came from West Africa, migrated along routes, and found its way in places as far as Morocco, Algeria, and a little path, the Sahel, if you will. And Ginawa music adopted Islam because it was a predominantly West African or African tradition, but it also adopted Islam in it. But the one thing that makes it very unique, along with other forms of music from Africa, is what they call pentatonic scale. Pentatonic scale, you've heard this all of your life, if you've ever heard a blues song. Or even... Now there are different styles of pentatonic scales. And if you go to places as far as even India, you have pentatonic scales too. Even in Japan. It's an interesting scale. It's a 5-note scale, pentatonic. 5. 5 is a very interesting number as a human being too, the way we conceive and hear things. And what's fascinating about this when I was studying music many years ago is one of my instructors said, you know what? You can find any village, any place in the entire world where they haven't even heard of technology, and you will find them singing pentatonic scales. It's so ingrained in the human being. So of course it would come from Africa. Where else would it come from? And so this is a little rendition here to give you an idea of what Gnawa music sounds like from Morocco. It goes on and on and on and on and on. It gets faster and faster. And then you hear them playing with these, what they call karaoke, these metal castanets. And notice that this rhythm, this is what I want you to keep hearing, this rhythm is a 6/8 rhythm. It's kind of like, this is the traditional African rhythm right here. It's a traditional rhythm that you hear all over the place. And you even hear it in Irish music to hear the African influence. Remember, I'm Black Irish. So that is from Morocco, North Africa, but it doesn't stop there. If you listen to music from Nubia, if you listen to music from Sudan, you hear pentatonic. I love Sudanese music. It does something to me I have no idea what it is. It must be an affinity. And I had the honor and the privilege of one day in Chicago playing at a concert with some of the greatest people that came from Sudan. There's a group called Bilal, Yusuf Mosley, Omar Hassas. These were just some of the most amazing human beings you've ever heard. And you wonder where blues and jazz came from? All you have to do is hear one of these songs. Then you hear this 6/8 rhythm, right? And you wonder, where does this come from? And what does it turn into?
Nothing but the blues.
Yeah, the blues came from Germany.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody had mentioned to me before.
Hey, it's not raining outside.
It's not raining outside. So you hear this thread. You hear how things tie back. You know, I was very fortunate to work with an African-American playwright by the name of Reginald Edmond. And together we researched for over the course of 2 years, including getting information from the museum here, from the Center for Black Music Research, and a variety of different sources. Many of you might be even familiar with the scholar Sylviane Diouf. And all of this started from a Saudi Aramco article that I read, titled Muslim Roots in U.S. Blues. And I thought, what? Muslim roots in U.S. blues? And I dug deeper and found the tradition and uncovered 1 in 3 people who were enslaved, brought to this country, were Muslim. And the one thing I wanted to dispel, because the grant that they gave us to write this play was challenge commonly held notions, or notions that are commonly misheld, shall I say. And a couple of them for me that stood out were, well, if 1 in 3 of these people were Muslim that were brought over here, by virtue of that fact, they read and wrote in Arabic. I thought, there's one notion right there. This is a very literate society, a literate people who probably speak several languages, in fact. And then from there, I discovered pretty much half of the people that you see on exhibit in here. Ibrahim Asuri, Omar bin Said, a variety of different people who have been here, writing in Arabic, but again, these are omitted histories, right? And so, through art, through music, I'd love to uncover some of these things. And we ended up writing this play called American Griot. And we kind of shaped the play a little bit about the story of Ibrahim ibn Suri, Abdurrahman. You might know him as Prince among slaves. And for me, that is something that many people weren't seeing. So we also wanted to challenge another notion. Where did the people come from? Not many people understand. All you say America and black folk, all you hear is slavery. Slavery. It starts there, right? And they don't realize, like, no, you have a culture, you have a people. There's Mansa Musa, Sindiata, Keita dynasty alone, all of these things that not only ruled Africa, but I'm preaching to the choir here, I know, but also set forth things in the region, hubs of learning, where people could learn, where people can learn to read. And it got you thinking, like, this is a scholarly achievement. There was an economy, there was all forms of things that would contribute to humanity. And those are things that we didn't see very often. And I try to do the same through my culture as well. My culture is, all of these are part of my culture in a sense too. But I'm going to go to probably our last piece here and tie it all back together. This is a piece that's from Egypt. Now, I wish I had more time because I have a huge Egyptian repertoire, Kulthum, Abdul Wahab, Abdul Halim, all of these things. And if you'd like a private concert, you can come back to me later and go to your home and do that. No hints there, but this is a song that it became a pop song, but it became one of those pinnacle moments, one of those pinnacle pop songs that kind of brought everything together. It's African by virtue that it's Egyptian, but it's also Spanish by virtue that it uses Spanish guitar, and the words kind of invoke also the words that you might have heard poetry about love in Andalusia. So it's the song is called Habibi Nur al-Ain, which means love or light of my eye. But if there's any word that I'd love for you to leave here knowing, it's Habibi. Can you all say Habibi?
Habibi.
Habibi means my love. You can call your mom, your significant other, your dad, your sister, your brother, your teacher, your son, your dog, your cat, Habibi. So when that chorus comes around, I'd love for you to join me with Habibi, okay? Habibi ya nur al-ain, ya sakin khayali, عاشق بقالي سنين ولا غيرك في بالي. حبيبي يا نور العين يا ساكن خيالي، عاشق بقالي سنين ولا غيرك في بالي. حبيبي 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 يا نور العين، حبيبي 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 يا نور العين، حبيبي 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 يا نور العين، حبيبي 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 يا نور العين يا ساكن خيالي.
حبيبي 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 نور العين حبيبي 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 نور العين حبيبي 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 نور العين ساكن فين حبيبي 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 يا نور العين 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 يا ساكن يا ساكن
Give it up for our guys. Thank you very much. It was truly an honor. I want to thank once again the National Museum, Muslim Cultures. I'm going to hand it over here to my man, Mr. Ayman.
What an awesome presentation here. Thank you all very much. And what a better ending than talking about love. This is a great ending for the whole night. So we want to thank you all for coming. Really would like for our performers, Brother Bilal and Malley and Nedal. If you all can go and eat first, since you are our guest here in Mississippi. And then we'll follow up. And while we're eating, there's a table here for Sudan and a table in Egypt. Please mingle up with the two countries here and ask them whatever questions you have. Thank you all. And again, next week we have actually a comedy about Islamic comedy. That's going to be a movie in the green space outside between the art museum and here. It's going to be at 7:30 in the evening. And then the following weekend we have actually Islamic architecture, and we have henna for some of the people that like this form of art, and calligraphy. We have a very talented architect that's actually going to be coming from Philadelphia. So we would love for you to come back there. And then the last weekend we have the Islamic Heritage Month Festival, which is also going to be in the green space outside, which starts at 1 o'clock in the afternoon until about 6 or 7. So thank you again for coming, and please enjoy the food from the 6 countries as well in the back. All right, you all have a good night.